All right, let's kick this off. There's a couple more seats up in the front here if anyone wants to push in here. But thank you, everyone, for joining us here today at 1515 Broadway. My name's Leo O'Connor. I'm the SVP of Advertising here at Paramount. I oversee the programmatic and yield business across the streaming and digital assets here at Paramount, which we bring to market as IQ. Today, I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel on the state of play in programmatic CTV and media investment. I'd like to first thank the panelists for taking time out of their day to join us here. There's really no better group of folks to weigh in on this topic, so I'm super excited to get into it. So to start, let's have each one of you give a quick intro, name, title, and what you focus on.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hayley Diamond. I'm with Publicis Media. I'm our EVP of U.S. Digital Investment and Global Partnerships. And that photo was taken at my 25th birthday party. I don't know where you guys got that.
That's great. Hey, everybody. I'm Tim Sims. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at the Trade Desk, where I oversee our global sales organization, as well as our partnerships team that looks after partnerships with folks like Paramount. So really excited to be here with friends to have this discussion.
Hello, and I'm Mark McKee. I am General Manager of FreeWheel, and so I work with both of these fine people as well as Paramount, and great to be here.
Great. Thank you. So we have a great cross-section of the industry here. I think points of view from the media investment side and buyer and seller ad technology. And I'll try to help frame some perspective from the media publisher side as well. But nevertheless, this group here has really had a front row seat to a lot of change in the last few years in advertising. So, evolution and change in this industry is a funny thing. And I think to me, it feels slow and chaotic while it's happening, right? And I think you take all the meetings and you're talking about all the things going on, all the things we're focused on. But then when you pull back, it's actually pretty fast and logical, the way that change happens and plays out. And I think a lot of it is because two things are always true. Consumers always find the way to watch content the way they want to watch content. And marketers find their way to the most effective channels for advertising. So change is going to be a theme for us today. So to kick off, let's do a quick speed round here of change. Just in the last 3 years, let's talk about how much the following things have changed for you. Just a quick round robin here. So 3 years ago, let's set the stage. So 2019, pre-pandemic, this building still said Viacom on the front of it. Let's think through, how has the way your household watches TV changed from 3 years ago to today? We'll start with you, Mark.
We changed from platforms like Paramount Plus, but we changed from platforms like we used to change channels. And so it's that fluidity of different platforms that I think is probably the most dramatic for us.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah. In terms of like our consumption, our family's been cord cutters for years. And so we've been kind of CTV only for probably 5 or 6 years at this point. What's changed in the last 3 years, though, is that there's been a lot of new platforms that have launched. So we've downloaded a lot of new apps and signed up for a lot of new services over the last couple of years. And to Mark's point, I think what that has created, at least in our family, is kind of like the same experience that you would have in linear, where we're kind of cruising around, checking all the apps to see, hey, what's on Paramount Plus tonight? What's on Peacock tonight? Just trying to understand like what's happening and watching across so many different platforms. And I think that's created a much more robust viewing experience for us in the home over the last 3 years.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Hayley?
Similarly, so we used to have one password to remember to log into something, and now there's 8, 10 borrowed/stolen passwords. So.
Nice. Okay. Plug your ears, some of you. And all right. So, what about the number of your clients who are programmatic first? More or less, or the same versus 3 years ago? Hayley?
More, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely more. I mean, over the last 3 years, I think there's been a huge acceleration of the adoption in programmatic, especially in CTV. So way more.
Yeah.
More programmatic and more programmatic first.
More programmatic. Okay, gotcha. What about the ad experience on CTV? Same, better, worse, anything noticeable? We'll start with you, Mark.
Great.
Nice. Put the ad server guy in the hot seat on this call.
I think Most of the direct-to-consumer products have done a really, really nice job with their ad experience because they've designed the platform and the experience overall with advertising in mind. I think some of the things where we could do a better job as an industry are the rise of fast channels. If you look at some of the fast channels, I think it was designed more for a distribution play. And so the advertising hasn't been well thought out yet. And so you see slates, you see things that repeat ads, things of that nature. And so I think there's some work to be done. It's a huge and really fast growing distribution channel. So I'm 100% in support of it. I think it's kind of that next wave of how we can consume content. But at the same time, I do think the user experience has not been really thought through on that advertising front. And then at the end of the day, it's not necessarily the fast channel, the distribution engine that's really going to kind of hold that kind of responsibility. It's really the content owner that's going to be the reflection of that bad experience. And so while there are these platforms that go out, I do think that's going to be one of the things that companies like Paramount have to really focus on, these fast channels and the experience that's created.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to weigh in quickly on our side, I think we made a bet to kind of flatten the ad experience across all of our platforms. So whether you're watching on P+, Pluto, MTV, same guidelines around competitive separation, frequency capping, specs, because I think that's the bet we're making. The buck stops with us as the programmer for that ad experience. Need to make sure that fans watch content and that they are enjoying it. So, what about you, Tim? Any observations here on the CTV ad experience?
Yeah, I think we've made incremental improvements over the last 3 years in that, like, I see a lot less slates now than I used to probably 3 or 4 years ago, which, by the way, just like breaks my heart every time I see a slate. I'm just like, oh my God, what a missed opportunity. So that is improved incrementally, but I still think there's a lot of headroom for improvement. And I think over the next couple of years, as the industry just continues to mature and everything that you guys are investing in, Leo, that you just highlighted, I think is going to just improve the overall experience, not just from a, do I see slates anymore, but also from a customization perspective, from an experience perspective, from even just how the ad unit itself engages with the consumer. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there, but we're just at that kind of early inflection point on CTV. So I have no doubt it's going to get better because there's a lot of room to improve, but we've gotten better over the last 3 years.
Great.
Yeah,
Hayley?
I know I'll say I won't repeat a lot of it, but I think we're around the same. Definitely have made some improvements and have some ways to go. And I think all of us as consumers would agree with some of those and be able to point to them. And as marketers, we certainly, provide our POV and share what we want, what we know works, or what we're looking for more of.
Right. Okay. Great. So last question here. What's the change in partners and clients who you thought would never go programmatic who have started to dip their toe in? More or less the same?
Definitely, absolutely more. I think that, it takes education, right? The concept of all ships rise in some capacity. So a little bit of meeting that client where they are on that education journey. And so dipping their toe into programmatic means different things for different people. But we're certainly there with all of our clients to some capacity.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think it's definitely increased, right? I think just the appetite for more granular data-driven advertising continues to increase. And I don't see that slowing down anytime soon, especially in TV, where we have this incredible opportunity to do all of this amazing, or apply, I guess, all of this amazing work that we've done in programmatic from a data-driven advertising perspective and point that at the television screen. I think that's incredible. And I think we're going to see just continued increased adoption in programmatic.
That's great.
And I'd say the same. It's certainly more, and we saw it over the last, I'd say 2020, 2022, just a rocket ship of more impressions, more consumption taking place. And so that drove a lot of the opportunity or unlock for more programmatic. And then certainly we still see a lot of growth happening, probably in the 20% of impression volumes per month, month over month. So there's still this huge trajectory, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, I think when we came together as three companies, CBS, Viacom, and Pluto back in 2019, we had one company with Pluto that was programmatic first. CBS, I think, was big in programmatic on the display front, but not fully on board on the video side. And Viacom was sort of somewhere in the middle. And I think we've kind of brought the three of them together, and I think it's been good to kind of bring a little bit of the best of each world together. And I think I think what we've come out with is a pretty balanced approach to it, but it's, it's not perfect. So, but I mean, there's still a ways to go. And I think as we've all acknowledged. So, okay. So as we think through this, hearing some themes, we're streaming more, remembering lots of passwords. We're more clients are leaning into programmatic. Perhaps some clients and colleagues have changed from never to maybe on the programmatic spectrum. And the CTV ad experience has some huge potential that I think we all see, but we're still growing into it. So in terms of the path to programmatic adoption, I'd love to talk through like, what are the top reasons why you hear clients start to dip their toe in? And I think, Mark, you can kind of weigh in from the publishers, with your client set, and Tim and Hayley would love to hear from you guys on kind of the marketer standpoint. Hayley, I'll maybe throw it to you for that first question.
No, I think a lot of it has to do with content transparency. So we all spend a lot of time talking about fraud, talking about privacy concerns, et cetera. And so I think that there's a big area where many of our clients feel like if they can understand where their media dollars are being placed with they understand the intricacies of the DSP, they trust that SSP, they know those publishers, and they're bringing it all together in a holistic way. They're feeling good about that. Again, that takes the education, right? You can't just jump all in. So that's where some of that testing comes in. But it's certainly been a key area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, a question I'll sometimes start with if we're sitting down with a client is a relatively simple question, which is that, do you feel like your media investment is accurately reflecting where people are watching television today? Based on what we read and all the stats that people like Nielsen and everyone publishes. And I think that's a really good jumping off point to kind of understand where they are in the journey as far as activation in CTV. And then from there, I think what leads to then testing and dipping your toe in the water in programmatic is just that most marketers these days have a much better understanding of their customer from a digital perspective, and being able to activate that data across this, somewhat fragmented landscape in CTV is really attractive because there's incrementality there from a reach perspective. There's the ability, like I said earlier, to activate that data. And then you also get this kind of holistic understanding of the marketplace through programmatic. And so I think those are probably the three key drivers to testing, which are data activation, kind of holistic, view of the marketplace from a frequency management perspective, and then the incrementality from reach. But I think that starting question is where I often start, just to see where people are in the journey and then figure out what the natural entry point would be for programmatic.
That's interesting. So do you think they see sometimes that the viewership is sort of is out ahead of where the ad dollars go?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that in mobile, and I think
Right.
we're seeing it in CTV as well, where the consumer is kind of ahead of all of us
Right.
in the media business, right? Like the consumer has already moved. Like they've moved to CTV, they've moved their viewership there, and so now all of us who are kind of in the, I guess, media business are now trying to figure out how do we adopt or how do we, I guess, adjust from a technology perspective, from a media execution perspective, and all of those different kind of facets that ultimately have us kind of catching up to the consumer. But I think that often plays out in digital, where the consumer leads the way and then the media business kind of follows behind.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think, a lot of the reason why for this to move forward, it has to work for both sides, right? And I think that was a theme of something, you and I talked about before around programmatic. It has to work for the buyer and the seller, and that's how we really start to get adoption here. So would love to hear your thoughts, Mark, on kind of what you hear generally from your client base, which includes top programmers, distributors. What makes them start to dip their toe into programmatic and really lean into it? And I can share a little thoughts from our side as well.
That'd be good. I think there's, in addition to the same kind of challenges or opportunities that the buy side is looking at, whether that be the agency or the marketer themselves, the supply side has that same problem, same challenge, but with some additional ones. They have Hayley saying, I want to go programmatic, and asking for it. They have to manage all of these endpoints. So on average, an MTV program is distributed with 400 different endpoints. Mm-hmm. And so almost re-aggregating their content, and by default, their audiences, is another huge reason programmatic brings some simplicity and to the complexity that exists. And I think the final one, which is a good one, is incremental revenue. And so how do you start to capture the audiences or incremental inventory that's available using not just the direct sales channels or even programmatic direct type sales efforts, but also using third-party demand at the same time? whether that be a DSP or an SSP. And so those are really the big three factors kind of driving that change.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I would echo that. I think having the liquidity and the diversity of demand that comes through programmatic is super important. As Tim said, the eyeballs sometimes outpace the investment. And I think you got to tap into as many pools of demand as you can. And I think, the simple task, or what sounds like a simple task of just filling the ad pods every day on Pluto TV, or filling the ad pods in a premium ad experience on Paramount Plus, you got to have a lot of, because we're also trying to enforce competitive separation, frequency caps. You have to have a lot of buyers in the mix to make sure you can deliver that broadcast quality experience.
Yeah, and as good as your forecasting can be when you think about live events, these huge spikes of volume, 1 million, 2 million, 8 million concurrent viewers at one time. And then knowing that you have your direct sold sponsorship like deals, scatter type deals, but then also programmatic is a huge opportunity for both the customer and the marketer, but also for the publisher as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about what makes clients dip their toe in, but I think something we've seen quite a bit in the last few years is clients who have gone from the sort of crawl phase to walking to running pretty quickly. I'd love to unpack a bit about what have you guys seen has been the sort of light bulb that's gone off for folks that's made them kind of fully dive in on programmatic and go from, hey, I'm going to dabble in this, to this is going to be my primary investment strategy. Tim, maybe start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you rewind the clock, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think there was, a kind of a myth that there was just like, oh, there's no scale in CTV, it's not premium. And there were all these kind of, I guess, myths that were going around the industry. And I think we've put those to bed, I think, once and for all at this point. I mean, every major broadcast network has a streaming service and either has or is about to launch an AVOD tier of that streaming service. And so I think we've got the most premium content, the most scale in the marketplace. And now you really can do all of the kind of promises of programmatic are available now at scale. And I think that gives everybody a lot more confidence to go from crawl to walk to run in a much faster pace than probably was even possible 4 or 5 years ago. And so I think we now reached this kind of like early maturity of the marketplace where like it's all there. And I think if you fast forward over the next couple of years, we'll be in a much more kind of mature, stable marketplace for CTV. But right now we're still building it. We're still growing it. There's a lot to be said about what Mark just said too, where it's like we've got 400 endpoints, I think you said, across the entire Paramount portfolio. And programmatic, I think, does do a really wonderful job of like normalizing that fragmentation for the buyer. And so the ability to kind of aggregate that fragmentation, point data at it at scale is, I think, accelerating the crawl to walk to run.
Yeah. Hayley.
No, I'll add on there, and I'll be the first to even say the word upfront on this panel. But the availability both from the publisher side, right, having those endpoints, creating those AVOD or SVOD opportunities, and then moving those into the programmatic space, just like you said, Tim, but making it available in a programmatic fashion. So, of course, as we go into a lot of our negotiations, we have people in the room and on both sides that we work with on this, is making those available as a part of that primary investment, tool being the upfront, and ensuring that that is an area that we can use those dollars, apply those upfront dollars, because that is still a thing we do, and try to modernize the way that we are activating those dollars. So the availability of pushing that into the programmatic space, I think, has been a key area for a lot of those clients.
Yeah. Amen.
Awesome.
Thank you, Leo.
That's great. No, I mean, I think something you said resonated with me. I think we try to solve, I think the problem we set out to solve when we put IQ together was that we wanted to be we wanted to put together all those endpoints into one single place where you can buy and manage a deal, because no one wants to buy 400 different endpoints and have to wrap their head around what that means from a reporting and reach and frequency optimization standpoint. And I think as we stitched those things together and came to market with this, it was a big light bulb for us that this is a way to solve a problem that I think a lot of our clients are looking to solve. So we talked a lot about what's happened over the last 3 years. What do you think is next? What's next on the horizon here in the next 3 years for programmatic, kind of specifically in CTV? Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
I think the biggest kind of shift we'll see is more programmatic, truly maturity. I know the trades and maybe even our press often sometimes makes it seem like it has reached saturation. And the reality is it's growing. We saw year over year, it's about 80% growth with the same inventory, I mean more inventory, but inventory being moved to a more programmatic transaction. On the flip side of that, each month, we still, from a premium perspective, it's still more than 80%, so probably around 85% is still done on a direct IO basis of all the 3 billion impressions that are transacted daily. And so I think there's just huge opportunity to kind of continue to move that. And then lastly, I think the combination of that with linear is just kind of the holy grail we always talk about, but I think it's realistic in the next 3 years.
Okay. Tim?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll just echo one of the points that Mark made, which is that, we presented these stats a few weeks ago. And so I guess this pulls from just various industry data, right? But there's roughly, call it $16 billion in the CTV marketplace today, of which about $4 billion gets transacted programmatically. So I would just echo what Mark said. One of the biggest changes I think that we'll see over the next, couple of years is one, that pie is going to get bigger, back to the media business following the consumer. So that pie of 16 billion is going to continue to grow. And then the share that is programmatic or biddable is about 25%. And I think that's going to eat into that other 12 billion that sits in insertion orders and kind of is done in a more manual way. In order to get there, I think we're going to have to do what Hayley said a minute ago, which is we're going to have to evolve how the upfronts work to include programmatic and guarantees as part of that biddable environment, because we've built this incredible foundation of biddable media thanks to things like IQ and other kind of advancements that we've had in the industry. And on top of that healthy biddable marketplace, if we introduce a guaranteed layer to that is also biddable and also guaranteed, so that Hayley knows what she's going to deliver and you know what you're going to get on the publisher side, I think that's what really starts to shift things in. And so I think built on top of Mark's comment about like that biddable and programmatically enabled portion of that pie is going to grow dramatically over the next 3 years. And how we get there is through introducing, or I guess pulling the upfronts into that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when we talk about programmatic, I sometimes, just to simplify it in my mind, I try to break it into like transactional considerations and technical considerations, right? The transactional is all the stuff you're talking about upfront. What are the norms of how we buy and sell? And the technical piece, there's a lot that goes into the protocol and bid stream identifiers and all of that fun stuff that could be its own panel. But I think from a transactional standpoint, Hayley, I'd love to get your thoughts on what's working, what's not. All the marketplaces that we respectively engage in, upfront, scatter, many to one deals, many to many deals. There's lots of different ways to buy. Do you think, have we hit a state of maturity, or we have a lot of work to do here? Where are we?
So we've made great progress, right?
Okay.
I think it goes back to, I'll be the education girl, but it goes back to a lot of awareness. So if you talk about something like the upfront, which has been around for many years, but it has been part of the lexicon of a particular group of investors, right? And now, just as Tim said, we are trying to expand that out into a world of programmatic, hands-on key buyers who are looking at, have been trained in, or come up in a completely different mindset to something like the upfront. So I sort of call it the collision of the two. So I think that we have a long way to go. I'm sure that anybody who sat up here in my position would say that they have an approach, they have a plan, we have education materials, we have people in the audience who are literally devoting their day-to-day to bringing those two sides of the coin together. And I think at Publicis, we're doing it quite successfully, alongside frankly, the three partners we have up here and many others. So I think the education piece, absolutely key to start.
Yeah, I think from a transactional standpoint, there are some things that I think have been big strides in the last year or two. I think talking about how to keep the spirit of the upfront intact as you lean into the value that programmatic brings. I think the biddable guarantee product in FreeWheel is a great way to do that, where some of the delivery is flexible, but the budget itself is not flexible. And I think that's a great solution. And I know, Tim, you guys have some products as well. I'd love to hear how the trade desk is thinking about how to kind of solve this problem of stability and how to strike the right balance between flexibility and guarantees.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've been talking about and talked with all of you guys about is just our kind of thinking is like how this evolves over the next couple of years. And we refer to it as a forward market. Will kind of evolve on top of what today is kind of a spot market for television. And so, in other words, like we're transacting in this always on marketplace that, as I mentioned before, is this really healthy biddable ecosystem. But in the future, I think there's just going to be a guaranteed layer on top of that. But from a technology perspective, a couple of things that need to happen to get there, and I think FreeWheel's done an amazing job of this, is just kind of collapsing some of the silos that exist inside of the publisher side that allow, just like with your biddable guarantee product, allow that stuff to compete alongside all of the direct sold business. Not to get into the weeds on this, but I think that's what enables that to deliver. But I think we definitely see a future where there's a biddable guaranteed marketplace that we refer to as the forward market that sits on top of this kind of always on spot market for CTV.
Yeah, but I would definitely be amiss if I didn't say like the evolution of the upfront, the evolution of the technical piece of how we're buying. When you're sitting on our side as a buyer, the math still does not make sense most of the time. Right? Just to look at what a cable CPM is that you've been locked into since the 80s and trying to move that into finding that right audience on the right platform at the right time is what you theoretically know is right, but the math just doesn't make sense. So as we talk about, adding fees for new products or, adding on anything that is non-working.
8 minutes left.
Always be
I don't need
negotiating.
for it.
We've had 8 minutes.
We knew we could count on
It's
Hayley
true.
for
Like
a
the math
spicy
doesn't
take
always
or
make
two.
sense.
Well, and I do think there are things that we're doing. You're right, because there's a lot of players. If you take an average, it's anywhere from 13 to 30 programmatic like intermediaries that take place between the buyer and the seller, often, programmatically. And so some of the things we're doing with the likes of the trade desk, how do we close that gap? And then in addition to that, if you hear about all of the ID spaces, everyone's got their own. You have one. Yep. Yeah. But everyone has an ID, and ultimately, for someone like Paramount, they have to figure out how to say yes to all of those IDs. Yep. And so the ability to get closer, call it ad tax, but just get closer to the dollar that is being spent and the audiences that they want to transact on, and the supply side themselves is really where we're spending a lot of our time to help on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as long as we reduce, it's interesting because the media business in many ways is like super simple, right? It's like we need to enable Hayley's clients to reach the audience that exists on Paramount Plus with as much, reducing the distance between your clients and Leo as much as possible, right? And I think that's something that we're really focused on and FreeWheel as well, about how do we just create the most efficient lane for you and your clients to transact on great content like Paramount Plus. And I think that just the dynamics of the marketplace, I think will over time create some equilibrium on the pricing, I think, just because as supply continues to decline. And linear, I think there's just some equilibrium that we'll reach over the next few years. But be that as it may, I think reducing the distance from the client and the content, I think is something that I think everyone in programmatic is really focused on so that you guys can do what you do so well.
Yeah. So I think we know Hayley's perspective on this, but I think in terms of, you talk through the pricing considerations, but in terms of predictability and stability, that to me is another huge consideration of programmatic versus the CPM you've been locked into since the 80s, as you said. It's the month-to-month lease versus a year lease, as an example. And I think, how important is that? I think as we try to think about striking the right balance between a traditional kind of upfront IO-driven business versus programmatic, how important is it to media clients? I know it's important to me as someone who tries to forecast and report revenue on a bunch of properties. It's important to have that kind of foundation of booked business. How important is it to the buy side to have that stability?
Yeah, I would, we always talk about it as flexibility, right? And so there's the clients that know that they need to be able to come in and out based on what's working for them, what's not, optimizing wherever necessary. But to specifically answer, I think we have many clients who we know need to fulfill, need to feel 100% confident that, to your point of stability, that programmatic is still a place that can offer that. So having some of that flexibility might be helpful when needed, but to be able to know that if you're looking at an impression count, you're looking at GRP replacement, you're looking at incremental reach, and you need to fulfill on that on a weekly basis to keep your numbers at a certain level, you have to be able to trust programmatic to be able to do that. So it is still of the utmost importance, and sometimes I think is one of the factors that might keep some dollars from programmatic. Because they haven't either proven that out yet, their MMM is still telling them that other places can 100% deliver, and that that's where to put their dollars. So it's very much a factor.
Okay. Yeah, Tim, I don't know if
I
you
was
have
just saying, I totally agree. I mean, I think the assurance on both sides, essentially, right? Like the assurance that you're going to be able to deliver what you need to deliver in programmatic, and then the assurance on Leo's side that there's another bid behind that bid that you just cleared. Like those two elements, I think, are really key to how we migrate that $12 billion that I mentioned earlier into programmatic, because that's where currently those sit in a very assured way, I guess, right, on insertion orders. And so we have to solve for that for sure. And I think that's certainly what we're spending a ton of time on FreeWheel as well. And so I think that's where it goes. But that assurance piece is really critical.
Yeah. No, I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our panel prep that, the thought of having a platform that's entirely funded by programmatic is still, I think it feels to me like we're not quite there yet, because we need this sort of mix of stability and, as you said, the ability to also layer in some flexibility with that. Would love to get, we only have a few minutes left. What do we think are some things we can do to kind of make sure that we continue to kind of develop this to a place? Because I know, for instance, let me expand on this. Like, I know that things work best for us when programmatic fills the gaps on top of a base of business that we have layered in. That's when things are really humming from us from a yield management standpoint, from a delivered revenue standpoint. How do we kind of keep making sure that we can increase predictability and stability for both Hayley's clients and the my publisher friends as well?
I think there's a few things that I would say. One is we think about the future, still relying on that consumer experience, I think can't be forgotten about. Yep. So if you work backwards from that, one of the big things that I think is probably the biggest gap in stability is measurement. Forecasting, the ability to forecast on an ID, whatever your agency or advertiser wants to deploy against. And so that's probably the biggest gap right now and the biggest risk in stability. We can technically deliver anything, that's not a big deal. It's that doing it at the right audience and knowing that whoever's grading your work, you have that great understanding and visibility on both sides, so you can have that confidence.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? No? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add one thing, which is that I think that on top, like to create more stability, there is this foundation of identity that needs to be present in order for that to happen. Everything that Mark just said, forecasting, the ability to deliver audience, that then I think creates that stability across the ecosystem, I think all starts with that foundation of identity. And from there, everything gets built on top.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for the time today. This was awesome. I really appreciate it.